Hello and welcome to Burley's World. I wanted to follow up with you with another video, and this is going to be the beginning of sort of a mini series video within the channel itself. This is going to be just me talking about my retirement plan. We're going to be doing other things beyond that, but this is one area that people have been curious about, and so I wanted to do a series of videos just on me retiring early, about 20 years ahead of schedule, I suppose. And people are wanting to know how in the world that's happening. What am I doing to make that happen? And so to catch you up on the last 20 or 25 years of how I got here, I kind of have to start at the beginning, and I'll try to run through that without it being too long and painful for you. But I think you have to know where I've been to understand where I am and where I'm going. So this all started with me 25 years ago. I knew that if I was going to work for myself, I was not going to be able to retire with a pension plan, a traditional pension plan that somebody in the public sector might have, you know, like a federal worker or a state worker or a teacher or somebody else that worked for the city, state, or county. Those pensions weren't going to be available to me. So I was either going to have to invest heavily in some type of a Roth IRA or 401k, something like that. But I had also seen a lot of market volatility over the years, and sometimes I thought, well, I don't know if that is that great of a return. And I thought maybe if I looked creatively, maybe I could do something a little better, a little different. Now, I didn't grow up with a ton of money. We were okay. We had meals. I didn't miss meals, but they weren't anything fancy. Rice, beans, some of the cheaper things in order to keep us fed. My mom was very frugal, but we didn't have a ton of money. My parents had 3 mortgages on their house at one point just to kind of keep things going, and it wasn't easy. We didn't get anything special. To get my first bike, I had to mow lawns in the neighborhood. That was back at age 11. I started passing out flyers all through the neighborhood so I could mow their lawn and earn enough money to buy a bike. That was the only way I was going to get it. My parents didn't have it, so I learned early on, you're going to have to work hard and earn in order to get things that you want in life. So that gives you just a little bit of the early beginnings of where I came from, and that translated into an understanding later on that I was just going to have to work, and I was going to have to work hard. Both of my parents worked full time all the time I was growing up, and so I saw that it's hard work, and even hard work isn't enough because you've got to work smart and hard in order to get ahead. One of the things that my dad did, really against my mom's better judgment, because she was very good and tight with her money. She could save any little bit that she could. She would save. My dad was a little bit more freer with the dollar, but he did get in touch with and associate himself with a few business people. In that process, he and some other guys formed a partnership, found some investment money, and they invested in some different rental properties, just single family homes. And I saw that as I was growing up, that maybe that was one way to get ahead, to have an additional income over time. Well, the way that played out was, sometimes the renters didn't pay rent, or sometimes the house went unrented, and then you were responsible for the mortgage. So it wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always, easy money for sure. And then you got to go and clean out or pay for somebody to clean out the mess that somebody left. So there's certain drawbacks to it for sure. but in the end, it was a tax shelter for them. They were able to write off a lot of things, and that helped them at the end of the year at tax time. And once they finally did get those paid off, now it took them almost 30 years to pay off those 3 rentals, but they eventually did. And once that happened, they were getting a rental income without having to pay a mortgage as well. And the rents slowly went up over time. So they were making additional money. And when they finally were able to retire, they worked really hard. They paid off their house, and they had these 3 rental properties that were also paying them money every month along with their Social Security. They didn't have a whole lot of other investment money, so that was sort of their retirement. Well, I grew up seeing all of this and watching this process, and I thought, that might be something I want to do too. Eventually I did. In fact, the first house I bought from my parents. It was one of their rental properties. They were getting tired of renters, and they were getting older, and they just wanted a steady income. So I actually bought it on a private contract with them. They had it paid off, so they were basically my bank. And that was a great opportunity. I was able to get in with a little bit less down payment than traditionally at that time it would have cost me. And that was helpful. That was great. So, some might say, well, you had an advantage. You had a jump start on things. Maybe, but I know that there's other people who have also run into that, had opportunities like that with people that weren't family as well. Sometimes there are people that are willing to sell on contract because it's advantageous. They don't get a big chunk of money all at once when they sell their property. They get a regular stream of income. And so, if they're getting several hundred or $1,000 or $1,500 a month or more, on a monthly basis, that's an extra income for them on top of Social Security or other investments or pensions that they might have. And so that worked out great for them, my parents, and it worked out great for me as well. I was able to get into a house fairly early on. And then I decided to ask them a couple of years later. I said, hey, what about these other rental properties? And they were willing to sell those to me at different times, about 2 or 3 years apart from each other. And so I eventually bought all of them from them, and they were glad because they were done. They were in their mid-70s. They didn't want to deal with renters anymore. And I was younger, quite a bit younger at that time. And so I was happy to take that on and start building equity in other properties for myself. And so I started out 25 years ago with that, and then eventually I did some conventional loans, and I didn't have a lot of, just like my parents, I didn't have a lot of money to stick in 401ks and things like that, but I scraped and scrimped and pulled as much money together as I could, and was able to buy yet another single family home, and then another one, and then another one after that. And it was at about that time that I began talking with an investment guy. Well, he's a mortgage broker, and he did a lot of investing as well, much more aggressive than I did. And he was a wealth of information, certainly. And I began to get into multifamily properties. I bought a fourplex that was completely a disaster. It had squatters living in it for 2 years, and it was bank owned and repossessed, and the only people living in there for 2 years were just squatters. And so it was a mess. There was a lot of work to do to get that up and running. And I took my slow period during my construction business, which was typically wintertime, and I worked from winter to spring to get those units rentable and get that place up to snuff so that it was worth bringing in decent tenants. Cleaned it up a lot, certainly put a fair amount of money into it, and to get the money to buy that place and then also to fix it up, I did a combination of a couple of things. I actually leveraged 3 or 4 of my single family home properties and pulled money out of those, refied them, and pulled money out in order to have some money. And then I also through the investment guy that I had mentioned earlier, he pointed me to a hard money lender. And hard money loans are not secured by a property per se necessarily. Sometimes they are, but they carry a much higher interest rate because they're loaning out money to something that's a little bit more risky. So usually you want to use that money and then refi the property as quickly as you can so that you're not paying 10 or 12% interest or sometimes more. So that's what I did. I spent about $45,000 on rehabbing the property and got it all rented, and then began the refinance process for that property. Once that was done, it was working, it was flowing well, the money was doing well. I only had to have 3 out of the 4 properties rented in order to cover all my expenses. So the fourth property, the fourth unit of the fourplex, was profit, and then over time rents were able to go up, and they've gone up probably in the last 12 years. They've probably gone up about 50% from where we started. So that's been a great property. And I've got some triplexes. I'm actually right in the process of selling 2 triplexes right now, and I've had those for about a dozen years. Again, there was definitely some creative financing that happened there, and because I was going to have to come up with about $50,000 for each property to put down on them, and through a little bit of creative financing, we cut that down to about half, and then we did some more leveraging of properties in order to pull some money out, and we're able to get those properties about a dozen years ago. And the values have gone up significantly over that time period, and we weren't always sure during the crash when values would come back up, but we were sure that they would eventually, and they have certainly rebounded and are right on track, I think, from where they would have been had there been no crash at all. We may be a little bit ahead of that, actually. So things have been okay once things began to rebound and prices were okay. And then I've got another property in another city that's about 4 hours away. It's a 10-unit apartment, and it's an old building built in 1900s. So it has a lot of idiosyncrasies that you might imagine would come with a building of that age, and so those can be a challenge at times. But we've been working over the last 12 years to bring those units up, bring the infrastructure of the building, the electrical, the plumbing, the gas lines, all of that, bring that up to a better standard to make that a more livable area for people. So that gives you the rundown of kind of where I am with properties. I'll talk in another episode about properties that I had that I no longer have and how that happened. There was some long distance investing that went on, and I'll be happy to tell you about the failures as well. There's lessons to be learned in successes, and there's lessons to be learned in failures. The ones you learn in failures, I find, are a little bit more indelibly written on your brain because you don't want that stuff to happen again. So I definitely learned some lessons, and we'll be talking about those in another episode. I will be talking in the next episode kind of a little bit more detail about these triplexes that I'm selling, about what I'm going to do next, and about some of the things I found out while talking to my tax guy about the sale of these. I've talked to you a little bit about the strategy I thought I was going to have and how that changed when I talked to my tax guy. So stay tuned. There will be another episode in a few days, and I will talk in more detail about that. Thanks for joining me. We'll talk to you soon.